Hello, my name is Duncan and welcome to one of my hot takes. This hot take is about our need for street trees, hopefully an interesting topic. So briefly, we need to consider the many benefits of having trees growing on our streets. I often talk about street trees being on the front line of the fight for urban forestry. They are obliged to grow in a much more demanding environment than park trees or garden trees, but due to their location, they do bring in heightened benefits too. For example, street trees will pick up more air pollutants than trees set away from transport corridors because they're growing exactly where the air pollution is highest. There are some good scientific studies that prove this to be the case. In addition, street trees are providing shade and shelter where it is very much needed. The image on this slide shows a line of plane trees, Platanus crucifolia, in the city of Bristol. It was a hot day when I took this picture, and the owners of these parked cars are benefiting from the shade being provided, as their cars will not be overly hot when they return to them. Also, a metalled road tends to get very hot on a hot day. Street trees can greatly reduce surface and air temperatures along these thoroughfares that we all necessarily use. Lines and avenues of street trees can also make links between green areas in towns and cities, acting as green corridors to facilitate the safe movement of birds, arboreal mammals, and insects. This tends to lead to biodiversity gains for the town or city if such links are present. There are several other benefits heightened by street trees that I can't mention for the sake of brevity here, but I will finish on another supported by social science studies. Private properties along tree-lined streets are significantly higher in value than along treeless streets. Dr. Kathleen Wolfe took the lead in such studies in the 2000s and included studies about retail premises on tree-lined streets, finding that potential customers lingered longer and were more likely to revisit shops where there were trees growing outside. You may be already well aware of all these benefits and the associated research that supports them, but it's necessary background for this hot take. It's worth noting that in the latest iteration of the National Planning Policy Framework, NPPF in England, there is an expectation for developers of new residential areas to provide street trees as standard. Why does that idea make me cringe? Because I doubt that the developers will put the investment in to achieve good tree establishment and growth, because you must invest to get good street trees. Okay, so street trees bring us lots of those lovely benefits, but we also must admit that delivering street trees in the city is a tough task. There are so many factors against them establishing and growing well, and they have a higher order of maintenance requirement than park or garden trees. This slide lists a few of those considerations. When young, street trees are prone to vandalism. As they become semi-mature, they need more pruning and maintenance in order that they do not impact on street furniture and the functionality of the street as a thoroughfare. They are also far more likely to have roots severed and to be damaged when underground utilities are installed along the streets, or there is maintenance of those underground utilities. As they mature, such street trees will need more regular assessments of their health and any associated risks because of where they are situated and the risks they could pose to person and property. Then we come really to the crux of the matter. Delivering large growing mature trees on streets is reliant on the trees having access to large soil volumes of the right quality and quantity to achieve good vitality and growth. Very often, trees are planted in small planting pits with highly limited access to soil volumes because the surrounding ground is compacted and full of barriers to growth such as underground utilities or the compacted crusher run needed as a foundation for roads and footpaths. Due to the limited viable soil volumes afforded to many street trees, they can be prone to not establishing, dying early, and having slower growth rates. So much so that some authors argue that planting street trees can be a carbon negative action. There are solutions to these problems. As mentioned, we can protect the trees from vandalism by placing them in cages. We can select trees of a suitable form and size that lowers the need for their maintenance, and potentially lowers the risks associated with them too. We can plan underground utilities in confined corridors so they do not impact on the main rooting systems of the trees. The soil volume problem, though, is more of an issue, unfortunately, because it's often harder to solve unless you're planting where the soil is mostly sandy and of low density. We can invest in underground soil vaults for street trees. There are many designs and products available to use for this purpose, but it does astronomically increase the costs involved in planting each tree. Such imported soil resources are a major investment, but at times perhaps a wise investment if we're being serious about putting in long-lived and large-growing street trees which give back the most benefits to the citizens. I would highlight that in the UK we have a lot of older street trees growing, established in the Victorian and Edwardian periods, that have successfully grown to large sizes, particularly lines of mature ash, limes, planes and sycamore trees. These successes give the impression that establishing large street trees is easy. Unfortunately, conditions have changed substantially since those times, particularly in relation to pavement and road engineering. More of the ground is now crushed and compacted to meet the modern specification for roads that now have to cope with much more frequent and heavier traffic. And this impacts greatly upon the soil volumes available to new street trees. The image on this slide shows a dying young lime tree in a street tree pit in a city in Lancashire. There was a well-established line of older lime trees here. So this tree was planted in good faith as a replacement for a mature tree that was lost. However, unlike the original lime trees planted in the 1940s or thereabouts, this new tree must try to establish itself in a much harsher soil environment, unless the expensive action of providing a soil vault for the tree is taken. As you can see, this tree has died back after its initial establishment period, which is typical of trees that find themselves confined to a very limited soil volume. Okay, so what have we learned from this hot take? Well, there's a good argument for putting trees in the streets. It's where they are most effective in helping an urban area, where they have the greatest impact. However, it's also more expensive to plant street trees and to maintain them when compared with park or garden trees or trees in public open spaces. Most probably, we should do the calculation. Do the benefits of a street tree scheme outweigh its additional costs? In the time-lapse image here, it's one of my time lapses, it's a case of a failed street tree scheme. First, please note that the pits for these trees were not generous in size and they were surrounded by compacted ground. Second, the scheme is not ambitious. Only small growing sorbus trees have been planted, probably to avoid having a high maintenance bill for larger trees that would need to be pruned regularly in this situation. However, on my return to this planting of 12 rowan trees 12 years later, only 3 of the trees were still present. Most of the pits were capped off and empty and covered over by small containers with flowers in them. The 3 remaining trees had not grown much and added little to the street scene. Considerable investment has gone into this scheme, but the scheme was ill thought out, and no significant benefits have accrued over these 12 years. Lessons should be learnt from such examples, and from examples where there is successful tree selection and establishment too. Thanks for listening to my hot take. Talk again soon.